There we go. Okay. All righty. All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Before we get started, I do want to do a land acknowledgement, and then I will provide a program agenda and then kick it over to our Dean of the College of Education to provide the welcome, okay? So Northeastern Illinois University acknowledges the history of the land that it occupies, recognizing that Native people, specifically the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, excuse me if I'm butchering that, and the Ottawa, and more than a dozen other tribal nations hold ancestral relations to this territory. As a beneficiary of Native genocide and chattel slavery, Northeastern Illinois University has a responsibility to address systemic issues that are normalized within our institution. Our call to action is an ongoing funding of Native American Indigenous Student Scholarship, and I will put a link to that in the chat. And we appreciate your financial support in this important initiative. So tonight we have a brief program for you. We're going to have a welcome by our dean. I will provide the history of the event and a little information about our scholarship fund. Then I will introduce the panel and they will talk about who they are and why they are so awesome. And then we'll have our discussion. We'll go through about 3 questions and then open it up for the audience for any questions, comments, discussion you want to have. And then we'll conclude with some concrete action steps that people can do and just want to be appreciative of your time. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to our awesome dean who will give welcome comments.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you to all of you. It looks like all 50 of you who have made time today for this lecture. I know you've all, no doubt, had very busy working days, and I'm just so impressed people are willing to continue on and participate in this highly relevant lecture. Also want to thank our panelists in particular for the wisdom that they're about to share. Look forward to learning from you and really appreciate that you're willing to give back to our community in this way. Thank you. And last but not least, want to thank Dr. Doreen Wheeler, Hua Bai I see here. I see Asora, other MACDL faculty as well. I'm sure you've all collaborated in putting this event together. Since I've been here, really have come to recognize how deeply core social justice is to NEIU. And I think the MACDL program is one of the leading examples of a program that really lives out this mission and vision for our university. So thank you to all of you. Without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Wheeler and the program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dean Filion. I'm going to share my screen as I give you the history because I'm one of those people. I can't let go of the little teacher in me. And as a visual learner, I always like something. Okay. So let me just be so happy because this is Dr. Alini Macris, who retired and left us, but we still love her. She's so awesome. This is our honoree, Dr. Kenneth Addison, and this is Dr. Ann Whitaker. This is Dr. Brian Schultz, Dr. Nicole Holland. That's me looking goofy. And then that's Dr. Erica Miners. We were the original faculty that Dr. Addison's legacy of hiring. And so I wanted to honor that, but I also wanted to honor his accomplished and profound work that he spent a lot of time, energy, and effort doing, and I wanted to acknowledge that. So let me just tell you more about Addison and Dr. Kenneth Addison Multicultural Education and Social Justice Lecture Series here at Northeastern Illinois University. It was established to honor Dr. Addison's dedication to multicultural education and social justice. Dr. Addison retired in 2009 after 30 years of service as a core faculty member in the department that started out as educational leadership and when he left was educational inquiry and curriculum studies within the Daniel Goodwin College of Education. Dr. Addison's retirement marked the culmination of a distinguished career dedicated toward advancing multicultural education and social justice, leaving a lasting impact on everybody he touched within the university and community. In honoring his legacy, EDFM faculty at that time created the lecture series and are in the process of endowing a scholarship award for NEIU students, forgive me, that are specifically those enrolling in the Masters in Community and Teacher Leaders Program, or MACTO. This is a very innovative program, like a little quick pitch for it, that pulls together K through 12 teachers and community activists, organizers, workers, to really put them through a master's program that can lead to a teacher leader endorsement, or if you already have a master's, you can take the first 5 classes and get the teacher leader endorsement. And it provides a curriculum that is grounded in critical race theory and grounded in engaged and liberatory pedagogy, and grounded in being transformative and social justice. So that's my pick for our master's. If you want any more information, see me or Dr. Bay after the program. All right. So without further ado, let me also, I just want to show one other slide so I can promote our scholarship. And I will put this link as well in the chat. It's got cut off. Okay, but I will put this link in the chat as well. We are about $7,000 short of being endowed, folks. So if you, every little bit helps, $5, $10, whatever you can do, it helps. So that's my little public service announcement about that. So before I introduce the panelists, I do want to talk a little bit about fugitive pedagogy, because I know some people may or may not know about it since this book is rather new. But I was introduced to this, and I want to officially thank not only my administrative support and assistance on this, Ms. Marlena Crunk, but also Dr. Monique Rudeau Smith, who just in connecting with her and starting out a relationship with her, awesome mentoring and sister, she and I put together this panel, and she introduced me to this concept of fugitive pedagogy. I am not going to read the slides. My students will tell you I do not like reading slides. So that's why I'm talking, so you can take the time to read the slides for yourself. But basically, fugitive pedagogy is rooted in the legacy of Black teachers. And like we were talking about in the group before we got started, most jobs that educated folks could have back in the day was ministers or teachers. And if you were a woman, you had to be a teacher. There was a lot of history behind how we could or could not educate our children. And I am a product of de facto segregation. And what I think is a lot of the concepts that comes out of this concept of fugitive pedagogy, of looking and thinking about ways to educate, create academic achievement, create learning, but also instill strong identity and instill human agency and resistance. So that is Dr. Givens' book. I put a picture up there so you have no excuse if you want to check it out and get it. I'm not going to be doing a commercial for where it is at, but that's that. So without further ado, I want to just say thank you everyone for joining us and this important conversation on education, justice, and resistance. We're here tonight because public education is facing a critical moment. Across the country, we're seeing book bans, censorships, and the rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Those policies don't just limit what's taught, they silence students, erase histories, and target the most vulnerable among us, especially Black students and educators. In this light, the work of Dr. Givens provides a powerful framework for understanding what's at stake. His concept of fugitive pedagogy highlights the long tradition Black educators who taught the truth about race, justice, and identity highlights, and the long and even risky and forbidden behaviors. This legacy of resistance in the classroom, what Gibbons calls fugitive, reminds us that teaching has always been a political and deeply courageous act. Tonight, we draw on that tradition, and our panelists are educators, organizers, and cultural workers who are continuing this legacy in their own ways. They challenge anti-Blackness in schools, advocate for inclusive and just learning environments, and speak the truth in time when doing so, and increasingly are under attack. Without further ado, I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves with your name, your role, and a little bit about your work that you do at the intersections of education and justice. Can we start with who wants to start us out? We can start with Dr. Monique. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see you.
All right. Well, I do not need 7 minutes for this, but thank you so much for providing us with space to have this really important conversation. Thank you for, NEIU for really bringing us all together again in this act of resistance, right? Because this is us coming together as a community and really struggling and figuring out and grappling with how do we move forward in this moment, because we know that this is one of many, right? We've been here before. And so drawing from the ancestors and also thinking and working together, we will once again we will overcome this moment as well, but we will have to do so together. And so I'm appreciative for being here. So yep, my name is Monique Rideau Smith. By trade, I am a middle school teacher, 7th and 8th grade social studies. I taught for over a decade in Chicago public schools. And so that's really my first love. And so now I actually work for one of the statewide teachers unions. And the work that I do there is really about using the union and labor unions being a way for us to advance justice. I wasn't always of that mindset. I didn't always come from that perspective. But my work inside of classrooms and also the change in leadership in the Chicago Teachers Union in the early 2000s really helped to create that shift in me to see the union as a way of actually advancing justice, and we could bargain for the common good, right? That we could bring community issues and struggles to the bargaining table. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about my upbringing. I have always loved Black history and learning about the history of my ancestors, but I didn't learn that history in school, right? I learned it outside of school. And so why I wanted to be a teacher was because I wanted to bring what I had learned outside of school into school. And I wanted to teach elementary because I was like, not all our young people make it to high school. So I wanted to be in a space where I could help young people to see the beauty of themselves, of their history, and also of other people's cultures. And I thought curriculum was just a wonderful way in which to do that. So I've always been very much into culturally relevant pedagogy. And to Dr. Lassen Billings' point that requires three things that I think that term is used often now, and it's even conflated with cultural responsiveness as well. But I think a lot of times we miss a key part of what is necessary for culturally relevant pedagogy, right? Everybody knows about that it is academically rigorous and that it's about academic achievement. And so we get that one, but it's also about cultural competence, right? It's about making sure that we are affirming students in their current culture. We are sustaining the knowledge and the culture that they already have and that they bring into school spaces. And then we actually use that as a bridge to help them to learn other cultures, right? And then the last one that we definitely like to ignore and forget about is the one in which we help to build young people's socio-political consciousness, right? That they're using their academic literacies to read and write the world, to identify injustice, and to say, how do I use my math skills? How do I use these reading skills? How do I use these skills that I am learning in school to help rewrite, and reimagine a different world from a perspective of justice, right? And so that is the work that my ancestors have always done and that I really wanted to do in the classroom. But in the classroom, what I found is that there were many policies that were coming from outside of classrooms, outside of school spaces, from people who were not educators, and that was really impacting the work that I was able to do in schools. And so that is what actually brought me into the union space. And so in that space, I now try to work with other educators in developing critical consciousness, or in developing lessons that really do meet the definition of being culturally relevant. And so I help to create professional learning opportunities for educators across the state. And I also do the work of co-chairing sustainable community schools, which is a model of education, which I believe will transform education and schooling, because it is a recognition of the fact that you must have community wisdom and academic expertise to really bring about school transformation. And so working with folks on this panel like Caro Gayate and G2 Brown, community organizers who know and understand and have deep relationships with community, I became involved in community struggles and recognized how important it is that we really ground our pedagogy in community, and that it is, again, community wisdom plus that academic expertise, and that schools are community institutions. And I believe right now in this moment, we have to take them back. So that's just a little bit about me, and I will turn it back over to you, Dr. Wheeler.
Thank you so much. Can we see some reaction support, Dr. Monique, like thanking her for that? All right, yes. It's a little reaction heart button if you want to give some love. So we're going to turn it over to you, Dr. Tracy.
Oh. So my name is Dr. Tracy Johnson. I am a AP art teacher at Walter Payton College Prep here in Chicago, and a new doctoral graduate. And before I got into doctor's program and into the studies, I've done some work with Pulitzer. I've done a couple of fellowships with them and looking at social justice through education. Some additional work with National Geographic with one of their programs out of Eat and Walk, and being a curriculum writer, podcaster, and other things. And my work, my research, going through my dissertation, even to now, post graduating, I've always looked at social justice, and even in teaching with my students, where I teach the idea of them being able to have confidence, the ability to not to be dependent on me, and that the things that I can teach you, like in the space that I have you for the arts, take these skill sets and like apply them to other things, but most importantly, take them to become a better citizen. So my work that I'm extending from my dissertation, I'm currently working on a book that really deals with a curriculum from pre-K through doctorate in facilitating the idea of Pan-Africanism and the idea of being a international citizen. You first must be very fluid in being a national citizen. And so with those things, to be a U.S. citizen is paramount for our students coming through the ranks of academics. And that is still my focus. The idea that the classroom is the most vital place, and it is it's a social construct, it's a psychological construct, and great things can happen there, but also great damages can happen there as well. And even with the idea of with Dr. Givens with the fugitive pedagogy, I grew up in North Carolina, and I kind of consider myself like the second wave of the integration of students coming in to schools and integration. And I've had coming from there and then working for about 6 years in public ed. I had a retiring teacher who asked me before she retired, so like we were doing a PD, staff-wide PD, and she was presenting, and she wanted me to stand beside her. Just like, Trace, I just need for you to stand with me. I said, okay. But she began to explain how before integration, that there was no deficit achievement gap among the African-American population with learning. And so that was something that really stuck with me. And like even with me now studying in the idea of like teaching towards full citizenship, I work to align that cultural logic. So my social science areas is looking at cultural logic in academics and how to align that with the students, and then also how to align other cultural losses so that you can get the best performance out of your students. I think one thing for us as educators is being able to reach all our students, and to have their presence there, not just with their culture, which is huge, but also in what they value, how they learn best, and in those areas. So I'm continuing those efforts today, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give Dr. Tracy some love. Yes, yes, yes. I'm gonna do my reactions when I can find that button. So, all right, our next panelist, Caro Gate, come on down. Carolina, we call her Caro. We can't hear you. There you go.
Okay. Okay, I wasn't sure I lost connection too. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Carolina, but Caro, which means expensive, by the way. Spanish lesson of your word for the day. I am a mother of also a Black child. I'm a popular educator. I am the daughter of a political refugee, also an immigrant, arrived in Chicago 1976 as a refugee from Chile. Currently serve as the executive director of Blocks Together. And I share that I'm a political refugee from Chile because it has really shaped, and if y'all know that really Chile was a testing ground for neoliberal politics, which I feel like everything that we're fighting now with education, being part of the education movement, fighting the privatization and the criminalization of our students, it's all really rooted in neoliberal politics. So I feel like this work has really been part of my whole life. I was 3.5 years old when it impacted me and forced my family out. And since then, really my work has really been centered around working with children of African and indigenous descent. And more be, like I said, where the streets are the classrooms, because I really feel that an educated soldier is the best way. So really in a fight, for me, has really been the importance of contextualizing the fight for our students, that the reasons why we had to fight school closures, why we've had to fight to change the student code of conduct, which I was part of with the students back in 2009 when I started at Blocks Together, really challenging. And it also was a bunch of students that we work with that also challenged the gang database, which my son was impacted, ironically, in the school that we did a hunger strike for in Little Village, because having police in our schools, he was in a gang database and we almost lost him to the system. But thankfully, like for sisters like Ananka and the village that supported me and my son, they weren't able to take him. But my son, the story of my son is a story of many of my, what I call my spiritual children that I have worked with in this journey of over 20 years, where they are criminalized just for being Black students, for being different, where their actions are criminalized. The way they looked have been criminalized. So for me, it has been both a spiritual battle and a battle that is really, as a mother, that is really about saving the souls of our children. And I know that sounds corny, but the reason why I was in a hunger strike in 2001 in Little Village was because our children, have been disinvested, have been forced to inhumane conditions, and forced to compete in a system where they had their hands and feet tied behind them and still had to achieve these rigors. Once the whole privatization under Daley started, the Renaissance 2010, and now school started acting more like a business. So there's there's a long history, but I could share. But at core, my fight has been around to ensuring that all our children have quality educations, public quality education, because this whole notion of charterization and privatizing was just another way to take resources for our community and make us fight each other. And I'm still at I'm still working for Blocks Together, still working with the youth that at 53 keep me still grounded and youthful and keep that fire in me. Like, this fight ain't over, even though I've been promising them I'm gone. And they're like, oh no, girl, there's still another fight. And there we have another big one. But I'm ready, taking my vitamins, Ananka. I'm ready. I'm ready for this fight. And I love that my youth keep me rooted.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's give her some love. Give her some love. All right. Dr. Elvira Pichardo, please come on down.
Hi, hola. I want to thank you, Dr. Wheeler, for holding the space and for creating the space for us to come in community and think about some of the repackaged nonsense that is happening nowadays and some of the things that we as educators have continuously fought for and we continue in this fight. To Caro's point, I'm also the proud daughter of immigrants. My parents came from the Dominican Republic, and I'm a proud product of the Bronx, New York. So that was my first kind of journey into what it was to be an American, basically. And then I realized right quick that whatever that was, my family and I didn't fit those norms. And the first kind of awareness that I had with it, unfortunately, was when I entered schools. So I went to a school that's community school, CS 88, and I realized that I did not speak the language of school because my first language was Spanish. And none of my teachers spoke Spanish, even though the community, and I did speak some English, Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow, they were my teachers. Oh, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, they were my teachers. And those of you that know, if you come from that era. But so I went into school kind of thinking about, those were my models, but school did not represent me at all. And I am very grateful to my mother that when I went in, I already knew how to read and write in Spanish, but it didn't matter because I didn't know how to do it in English. So when my mother was called in for a meeting, she said, no, she doesn't need any kind of, you don't need to fix my daughter. She doesn't need remediation. She doesn't need to be fixed because she can do it in Spanish. Just give her time and she'll be able to do it in English. So they actually listened to my mother, and I was able, in 3 years, guess what happened? I could read and write in English. Why? Because I was able to do it in my native language. I say this because I'm a bilingual educator now, and my journey started, Dr. Monique, as a middle school educator. So my heart is with 6th, 7th, and 8th bilingual education in New York City and in Spanish Harlem, actually, before I moved to the Chicagoland area. And then I was a bilingual coach throughout here. But one of the things that actually I've been hearing and kind of thinking about growing up in the Bronx and living in urban environments for the majority of my life is kind of the spirit murdering, to Caro's point, of our communities and of our children, and how schools are a microcosm of society. So sometimes those things that we fight against in our communities are being actively replicated in schools. So we really want to create, and something that I work with my students is really creating critical consciousness. Like, I want you to question me, please. I want you to sit in your discomfort, and I want you to speak up. Because if we don't, then we're complicit in some of the things that are happening now. As a mother of an 11-year-old son, I'm also going to share that one of the reasons that I am very attached to language is because my son moved from the Bronx, New York, only speaking Spanish. We moved to the Chicagoland area. He went to school. He came back only speaking English. So by the age of 2, my son made a linguistic choice. And he is 3rd generation and has lost Spanish. Now, I'm not saying that Spanish is the only indicator of identity, but it is something that I hold close, that I try to keep within myself, and that I would like my son to also hold close, because there are histories that are oral. There's communication with my mother, with his aunts, with my niece and nephew that I would like to continue. I say this because sometimes we don't think about the fact that students know so much. And if we create the space to be able to have them use their voice, then we can learn from them also. So my research is on that. It's like, how do we create bilingual spaces, multilingual spaces, using translanguaging, where we build up well, we already know what's happening in our communities. It's just that now we hold space for it in spaces that aren't traditionally made for that. So yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Let's give us some love. Give us some love. I want to see some love. All right. And last but certainly not least, we have Ananka Shoni. Come on down.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's so good to see some of the faces here tonight. My name is Ananka Shoni, and my work is primarily completely based in the community. I'm the daughter of a social worker, and my mother's work, she was a social worker in the 80s and 90s during the crack epidemic, and that completely impacted my family and the work that my mother did, and and it really impacted how I saw life. And I also grew up in a situation where a lot of people didn't know that I was Black. So I grew up in this situation where when people discovered that I was Black, it was I had to deal with this constant letdown. I had friends from all different cultures in school. I dealt with things in the classroom where I was dealing with this constant anti-Black situation. People, oh, I didn't know you were African American. Even other people from the diaspora, it was like just constantly dealing with seeing who people, how they really felt at certain points. I also grew up with a learning disability that really impacted the way I engaged school. School was a very, very difficult time for me. I've been through a lot of things in my life, but school was extremely difficult, and I didn't get diagnosed until 11th grade. So I had to kind of like struggle through school and survive school in many ways. And it kind of shaped how I deal with society. I always wanted to be a teacher growing up, but I felt like I was never smart enough to be a teacher. So I would always try to craft up these ways to like inadvertently get involved in education. Right now, I'm doing some work. My work is I teach at a freedom school in Maywood on the weekends. That's sponsored by the Black Star Project. I also am working, doing some work with some elders in my community, doing some like home health caretaking, helping take care of some older Black women in my neighborhood that are absolutely amazing. I also have a small home-based business that I have where I do hand-painted clothing, and I do cultural products that I sell at local markets, partially to always cultivate that creativity in me, but also to be able to supplement income because of the ways in which that I'm so intentional about engaging community, working with parents, working with schools, working with, I guess you could say, refuge educational spaces in these freedom schools and these offshoot educational spaces where we're having conversations with parents and teachers that are not in traditional educational spaces. In order for me to do that, I have I have to get my income rolling in various different ways. But I'm intentional about making sure that it's all connected into my community, my love of community, and my deep commitment to be able to work on healing within the community conversation. So some of my past work has been working with young folks and returning citizens that have done work in housing, work in healing. I'm doing also some work with Dominican University with some food justice programs with a group on the West Side and some folks over here on the South Side. So I'm kind of like in all of these spaces with this, and I'm working them all into this theme of love and healing and justice. I did a survey of, I kind of rounded up that I went to between 2017, and this just sounds absolutely outrageous, but between 2017 and 2023, I went to 87 funerals, and I couldn't believe it. And a lot of these I was getting invited to. By 2022, my health had completely tanked, and I ended up going through all kinds of things. And I'm the health person that's trying to bring healing about. But I realized how much grief and grieving in our community is really, bringing us to a standstill in many ways, trying to get people to learn, trying to get people to get involved in their grieving, and the impacts that those things have had on our health and so forth. So I guess I'll leave it there. I'm also a mother. My mother, I have a wonderful son who's also been with me on this journey, working and doing community involvement. I talked to him before I got on this call, and he always helps like ground me and center me and in the work. And he's stayed active, being intentional in community space. Are you able to hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so that's the gist of me, my social work, being even just being a fair-skinned Black woman has informed a lot of my work. I've seen a lot of things and been exposed to a lot of things that have informed how I engage community, some of the things that we're dealing with, and working outside of traditional structures has been my main engagement, supporting teachers in classrooms, because there's still a part of me that's still definitely afraid of classrooms. As much as I don't want to admit that, it's true. There's something about those legitimate spaces that still bring some forms of former trauma for me, I guess. But thank you so much for having me. You got so many heavy hitters on here, and it's an honor to be here with you all.
All right. Thank you. Let's give us some love. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to put the first question in the chat so everybody can see it. And I will say it so that everybody knows what we're talking about. So how does anti-Blackness manifest in U.S. schools today, particularly in policy, curriculum censure, and disciplinary practices? And some of you have already alluded to a little bit of this. So again, how does anti-Blackness manifest in schools today, particularly in policies, curriculum censorship, and disciplinary practices? And whoever wants to begin, go ahead and begin. I'm going to give about 12 minutes to this topic so we can try to make sure we leave time for the Q&A and stuff.
I could just share a little bit around what we fought around starting back in 2006, 2007 was the high risk of students being pushed out. With this whole thing with Renaissance 2010, which was really started the whole wave of privatizing Chicago, they became more punitive with their policies, criminalizing our students. So we saw a high number in students being suspended. In particular, the school I was working with at the time was Orr High School. We saw how they began to destabilize the school, how resources were taken away. And then we understood a couple of years later when that was one of the schools to be turned around. So we began to understand the policies, right? And every year they came out with new different ways of standards for closing schools or turning schools around, which at the core was the privatization and decentralization of public education, right? So what Trump is talking about now, I know people are up in arms. I was like, hold on, let's relax, because we've been at this for a while. And we need to understand the larger fight, right? It's not just Trump. We've been dealing with this with Democrats also. Race to the top, right? People get mad when I point out that was President Obama bringing Renaissance 2010 to a national level, right? So this notion of criminalizing, the connection of private prisons and then these punitive policies and bringing police officers into the schools, we saw the rise, right? And what mostly impacted was what I've seen in particular have been Black students. Policies like the gang database, the zero tolerance, and the discipline policies that we had to fight to change at the core was these policies in a system that is designed to do what it does, right? So let's not act like this is something new. This system was built on white supremacy, and we continue to fight white supremacy in the classrooms every day. So through the curriculum, through their policies, and through their practices, and through their biases of our children. So I would say that has shown up in their policies, practices, and beliefs, in believing that we also are dangerous by nature, right? That's why they have to police us more than in other schools, that we are not as capable that our intelligence is not as high as theirs. So, and they've shown it by not investing in our students' future and criminalizing us and treating us, like they said, it's not the school to prison pipeline for our community, it's the cradle to the prison pipeline. And that's what we've been fighting.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd like to go next. Um, I was at Orr before going to Walter Payton and doing the aftermath of what you were just speaking about, Carol, and for about 7 years, and everything that you said is there, magnified to just a few years ago, and the whole idea of policy, and then like the practice of policy, like the majority demographic of the people in United States academics are white females, and in getting people to look at all people, like the multicultural student body that we have, and also the rest of the workforce within academics is so important. It becomes that question, like, and even when I knew I was going to be a lecturer on this panel, I looked. I had always studied James Anderson, and with his research, I mean, he went back to doing Reconstruction. I mean, to speak about fugitive pedagogy. Before the U.S. Department, it was equality that was the most important thing in divvying out money to the states when it came to education. And he gave an example. I think it was Alabama, where it took more money to get the student population, the African American student population, up to the standard, and that was fine because the idea was based on equality. A few years after that, that term equality was changed to equity, and so today that term equity is really forced through in so many areas, and I always question, like, well, we're talking about U.S. policy. We're talking about democracy, constitution, equality should be the key word as opposed to equity. Two very different terms. Equity is something I always see that is something that could be assessed by the person who are like providing access to the funds or the service. And I think that becomes a very dangerous thing. Is what we are looking at now. How are policies practiced? How, like, who's following up on the things that have to be done that's right for the students? And so, and then, like, you look at with curriculum censorship, you look at the idea of suppression of the African, the cultural essence that our students bring in, and as well as other students. Asa Hilliard, spoke and did some research up in Evanston with that, the idea of cultural wealth. That's just the suppression of everything that happens within a school, within a classroom, all the way into like disciplinary issues. You look at the idea of students who have IEPs, students who are given IEPs. You look at students who are given suspension. There are precedents that are acted on, and the policies are normally written where they have so many loopholes that the practitioners can funnel, unfortunately, those students through in the direction that they want for their own purpose, the teacher's purpose, and the principal's purpose, as opposed to the student's purpose. And unfortunately, many of our families that send their children to schools, they're not too well equipped to be able to fight back with that. I think Dr. Pichardo, if with your mother, I thought that was a great comment. Like, no, I'm gonna walk into the school, my child will use Spanish until she can use English. That's wonderful. That approach should be taken, I feel like, all the time. Allow the child space to grow into their equality.
Thank you. Anyone else? We have 5 more minutes for this question.
Since he mentioned my mom, I just want to say that we really want to look at community wealth and how communities are thinking about the role of public education. My mom was an immigrant from Dominican Republic. She went in Spanish and told the school that. So sometimes we underestimate what our parents and what our communities are capable of because of the ways that we think community involvement looks like, or we think that parents, oh, you know, they don't come to parent teacher conferences, so, oh, they must not be invested. And what we really want to encourage is that, for example, this whole movement on parental rights and book bannings, this has been happening in our communities for a long time. My mother is an example of that. However, the ways that it's being portrayed in the media or that is getting most attention is through parental rights that are advocating for example, quote unquote quality education in the forms of school vouchers, in the forms of school privatization. So a lot of, for example, school vouchers go to private schools, including private schools that are based in the teaching of religion, kind of also thinking about the creation, for example, of charter schools, which then are competing with our own public schools for kind of school funding. So all these things are, when we think about what's really happening in anti-Blackness, where are charter schools rising? Where are public schools being not funded? Or where are public schools losing money or being closed? What are the students that are like, oh, we had this goal, the students met it, now let's keep upping the goal, which Caro alluded to before, under the guise of accountability measures, which started with No Child Left Behind and then continue with Race to the Top, and is still continuing now. So even when we look at our students, we always think about our communities and our schools as they need to be fixed. And that is not actually what is happening. There's so much community wealth that we're in, cultural and linguistic diversity and cultural and linguistic funds of knowledge that we're not creating a space for, because we keep being limited by this kind of neoliberal lens, by this anti-Black lens, by these very narrow ways of knowing. And I think that as educators, we need to challenge that. We need to realize that our parents bring different things to the table. Our students, they know. And being a middle school teacher, they let me know all the time, like, this is this, and this is why this curriculum, I'm not doing it. And I'm like, fine, let's think about other ways. What we see as students voicing discomfort, acknowledge it and also hold space for it, because that's an opportunity for us to learn from them, because they are the future of this country. And if we keep holding them to these narrow kind of views of like, this is what literacy looks like, this is the history that we're going to teach. Oh, this book has a African-American character. Oh, we're not going to read it because we're going to have parent complaints. No, we should read it, because in order to have a well-functioning democratic society, we need to be well-versed in the different perspectives that exist around us. And we need to stop thinking about, oh, well, the students need remediation, they need intervention, they need this. No, we need to listen. And we need to realize that in our communities, for example, in Black communities and Afro-Latino communities, there's a strong history of oral storytelling, because literacy was an act of resistance. So when we think about literacy, when we think about reading, and when we think about book bannings and censorships, we need to place it in this kind of historical context of why is it that they don't want us to read these books? Why is it that we can't talk about Navajo code talkers and we can talk about Jackie Robinson's legacy? Why is it that all these things are now seen as quote unquote DEI? It's history. And it's a history that our students should see, so that they can know that what we're seeing now, it's something that our communities have persisted and resisted throughout the years. So
Thank you.
I
Ananka?
know we always almost
No,
up,
we
Dr.
got
Wheeler.
time. We got time.
Okay.
We got time.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in because I wanted to definitely lift up right now the push out of Black teachers, right? Because Black teachers are known for this kind of pedagogy of bringing in community struggles, of bringing in injustice, of bringing in all of these things. And yet across the state and across the country, we have hundreds, probably thousands of schools that serve mainly Black or brown students, and yet have only 1, 2, maybe no teachers of color or no Black teachers. Now, I want someone to tell me where the school is that has an overwhelmingly white student population, but the overwhelming majority of teachers are teachers of color. I'll wait, because maybe they putting it in the chat. The fact of the matter is that there would be none, because white families and white communities would not tolerate that, right? They would not accept that. And so we have to also think about that as well, as that has become something that is not only okay, but it is normalized. There are thousands of schools that serve Black and brown children where the teacher body, there is no one that looks like them, that can relate to them, that understands their struggle of trying to navigate these spaces, right? And so I think that that's something very important to lift up, because one of the things that's on, that's being attacked here is the minority teacher scholarship, right? That's one of the things that they are coming for, because they don't want to see Black and brown educators in the classroom. There is well-documented research about all of the benefits that Black teachers specifically bring into classrooms. We know that there is a decrease in suspensions and expulsions when you have Black teachers. We know that there is an increase in the likelihood that students will actually enroll in college and universities. We know that there is more likelihood that issues of race and class and privilege and power will be discussed in those classrooms, right? And it's not just benefits to students of color or Black students. Black teachers bring benefits for students of every race. That is well documented. We have research on that for the last 50 years. And so again, these folks know what they're doing, right? When they are intentional about keeping these folks, they want to keep Black mothers and brown mothers and Black fathers and brown fathers out of these classrooms. Because to Cato's point and other folks' point, when I walk into a classroom with Black students, these are my children. I'm not fearful of them. They look like my child, right? And so there's a different orientation that comes with that. And so that is part of the reason for trying to, once again, rip away Black children from Black mothers, right? And there's a history in this country of that. So that's one thing that I wanted to note. But I also wanted to note that the fact of the matter is that even if we attempt to diversify the profession, that's not going to happen overnight. So being culturally competent cannot just be held at the feet of Black and brown educators. We need white educators who are the ones who are in, who, you know, they overwhelmingly are teachers, to become culturally competent. Do you know the culture and the history of the students that you stand before every day? Have you taken the time to learn about their culture, to learn about their history? Have you engaged with their community to learn the assets, the strengths, the concerns, the needs of the community, right? Because if you have not done that, and yet you come into that space every day attempting to educate, that to me is educational malpractice. And that goes for not just in education, but for anybody who's going to do any work in a Black or brown community. If you have not taken the time to learn about that culture, to learn about the history of that culture, then it is not your place to be there. And so we need to also push that for our white educators, that it has to be their responsibility, it has to be the expectation that if they are teaching in these spaces, particularly in spaces that serve Black and brown children, that they engage with the community, that they have a level of cultural competence and understanding. And so I think too often we're just looking for, unfortunately, bodies to put in classrooms, and that has caused just unconscionable harm. So I wanted to make sure that I put that on the table.
No, girl, you dropped the mic on that. We needed that. We needed that. Ananka, girl, I want all of y'all. If you want to say something.
Yes, I do want to say something. Thank you. You know, everybody is helping me reflect. Just this past weekend in my in the Freedom School, we're discussing. We're reading a book called "You Call This Democracy," and we're going over, you know, what democracy is, different forms of government. I'm working with 4th graders through 8th graders, and the kids are just on fire in this space, right? And I wouldn't say it's because I'm necessarily doing something special. The fact that it's not an actual school space, the kids, like I literally have and I'm not knocking schools, I'm just bringing this up for perspective, you know, they're in a much freer space where they can dialogue and they can talk. I had one student, she waited until after class, Keita, and she said, and I said, thank you for all your contributions today. And she said, you know, I never raise my hand when I'm in school, right? And I said, really, right? She said, yeah. She's like, I just don't feel like my words are going to really be able to come out, right? And she kind of was going through her anxieties. The other component to the other people who spoke today is a lot of their parents are able to come into the classroom and kind of sit in a relaxed manner and kind of dialogue. So my classroom is all Black and Mexican. That's the demographic in there. And so you have all kinds of conversation happening in this more free space where the children are able to relax, the level of social anxiety isn't there. The parents are able to be involved. And to everybody else's point over here, the level of bringing, I think, families back together. I did a program a while back where we were doing a communiversity program. And we brought in, you came into that, Dr. Wheeler, right? And, you know, we had families all coming together, being able to do some projects. I was teaching leathercraft in this particular program. And we had different, however family was constructed for them. If your family was made up of your homie and your uncle, they came as that was their family. If it was your auntie, we had an auntie and nephew, we had a bunch of siblings that all got together and they constructed these groups of families. And they discovered while they're in this program that they love being together, but they never have any time to be together. And they literally have started building coalition, an entire coalition around schools, school closings, all different types of things in school. And they just recently had an exhibition called School Closings as a Hate Crime over at UIC. But the whole point is, you know, school, we have to work together in this community aspect, really embrace what kind of education can happen in these community sectors, because there's a real wealth of knowledge that's getting brought out in those spaces where you're not under all these intense regulations, you're not under all these intense things. And really, how can we support classroom teachers in what's coming out of these spaces? Because a lot of children don't feel valued, they don't feel safe. And especially with the demographic that I have of you know, Black and brown students, you can see it on their face. They just feel free. They're happy. They feel like their words matter. They feel like their contributions matter. They're open, you know, in ways. And of course, it's a different setup. You're not there as long. It's not as, you know, the setup is not as long, but there's something there that can be brought into classroom spaces. And it speaks to a lot of I think the anti-Blackness that exists in the classroom now, that you have children and you just see their brilliance coming out with all of these different things, looking at, they have to take on this new society and what this means for them, what they think about this current administration. And also, as somebody else was speaking on this point around, you know, just Black history in general, or cultural history, learning about it helps you have this social emotional connection to the material in a way that helps you perform better. When you're learning about things that you're connected to emotionally in certain ways, and to remove that is going to be detrimental to, I think, the learning process of our children. To remove the historical concepts from our children, where they're coming from, where they're going, you know. And last thing I'll just say is some of the children I noticed, you know, when you get when I have the fourth graders in there, they're popping on Black history. They love all these different things. They're showing everything that they know. As I get over into the 8th grade classroom, they're like, look, you know, and I know there's a lot of things happening. There's the hormones and there's all different types of things going on at that level. But they're like, look, we didn't talk about that enough. What's the next step? Where are we going with this? What are we doing? You know what I mean? And that's just like, yes. And how do we support them in these conversations? How do we support them in these dialogues about what's next? Because then they start flatlining and get bored, and then we start talking trash about why they're not doing A, B, and C, and they're coming to us saying, hey, what's next? You know, it's great. We've been talking about these fantastic people in our history, but you know, what's next? So that's my piece. Thank you.
No, thank y'all. And if everybody want to talk, I'm fine with that. Y'all know I said earlier, I'm a go with the flow, but we will definitely make sure for the audience to have some time. So our second question is, what would be the consequences of eliminating the U.S. Department of Education for Black and marginalized students, educators, and communities that rely on federal protections and funding? I'm going to put the question in the chat so the audience and everybody can see it. What would be the consequences of eliminating the U.S. Department of Education for Black and marginalized students, educators, and communities that rely on federal protections and funding? And we'll give this question 10 minutes. Anybody can start.
while ago. I was at a conference. I was at the National Council for Black Studies annual conference last week, and similar question was kind of like brought up. It was kind of like the whole flow concern throughout the conference, and uh, just off the bat, just with the nature of this lecture, the idea of fugitive pedagogy, I would just say, we ain't scared. We, as African and Black and Brown people from around the world, like we create things. We create learning. We create communication, community, and everything else. So, I made some notes when Dr. Willard, when you sent this question out, and I just put in comparative analysis. Um, um, how would you compare total captivity versus mental captivity to to full citizenship? So, like in the question I posed to the National Council of Black Studies during the webinar before we had the actual conference was, what are some lessons that we can learn from the different major shakeups of this country? Like most of the constructing of a better democracy in this country has been largely done externally from the white population and the government, from our demographics and with our Black and Brown community. So, in realizing what true democracy is and knowing what has to happen, we're really dealing with a subculture of the white population with this idea of fear, of being marginalized, of being left out. And so, like, I always try to like make certain like not to project what what we would think would be the right answer for the people who are perpetrating um, a criminal act, if you will. Um, so even though we all know, everyone here knows what needs to be done, how to do it, and how to function, how to grow. We all do. So how do we take advantage of a system that's being destroyed from the inside? And how do we look at the idea of what needs to be changed, what has to be changed? Because this wasn't a perfect system before. I mean, come on, like what are we really afraid of? So knowing that, and then when these things are happening, when you see a gap, when you see something, go get in there, make the change. We have to respond. We have to respond, all of us, in the ways that we do best, and make those changes better. What our ancestors have done, what our elders have done. Those are the things that I feel like that we need to do.
Thank you. Anybody else want to get in on this one?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was kind of, tussling with that question because I was like, why are we protecting something that hasn't protected us? And then to Dr. Tracy's point, this is an opportunity for us to rebuild something that hasn't served us, right? So how do we take all these fights that we've known about, right? Because we have been, for the last 20 some years, I've been fighting that Department of Education, those policies that have criminalized our students, those policies that have imposed curriculums and tests, right? So yeah, I would say something has to be destroyed, right, to be rebuilt. And I think take those lessons and how do we come back and know that this is not a loss. I don't see this. I think this is a pause and a time for us to come back together. And how do we rebuild something that at the core is going to benefit us and really understand? I know there's a thing, but what are we protecting? And that has been my question with everybody coming with this fear. Like, what are we protecting? A system that has never been good to us.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, so let's move on to our next question then. All right, so our next question is, sorry, I muted myself. How can educators and school counselors employ strategies such as fugitive pedagogy to resist anti-Black educational policies while protecting their students and themselves? I will put this in the chat and I'll read it one more time to give you guys a chance to get your thoughts together. So again, how can educators and school counselors employ strategies such as fugitive pedagogy to resist anti-Black educational policies while protecting their students and themselves? And Dr. Monique, I'm going to ask you to start because you introduced me to this.
No, I think for me, the two C's come to mind. We got to have courage and competence, right, as educators, right? Because we know also from research that teachers teach things that they feel competent in. So if you haven't learned about the history of marginalized people, people of the global majority, if you haven't engaged with those communities, you're going to be less likely to teach to that because you don't feel competent in it. So I think confidence, courage, and competence has to be a part of the formula of what we are doing. And it has to be courage because, again, they're going to attempt to threaten folks, and it has to be a level of collectivity. Because if it's one or two teachers in a building teaching culturally relevant pedagogy, right, they're going to come for those one or two teachers. This has to be a collective struggle. And that's the reason why talking about anti-Blackness is so important, because anti-Blackness makes us all unsafe, right? Black people have been on the front lines of every social movement in this country, period. We've always been on the front lines. And it's time that other folks got to take on the burden. We're going to fight because we have to, because we going to die if we don't. Right. So Black folks are going to fight. But I think what you're seeing right now, and if you look on social media and in other places, what you're seeing right now is a fatigue, especially amongst Black women who are being called to the struggle now and who are saying, well, what do you mean? We've been there. We were fighting for you and you didn't fight for you. And now you want us to come now that you believe the sky is falling. Well, the sky always been falling for us, but you didn't care as long as it was just us. And so that's why having this conversation about anti-Blackness is so vitally important, because it is found in every single community. It's not just a US thing, it's a global and international thing. And we got to be real about that and tap into it. Because one thing I do know is we're not winning nothing without Black folks. We're not. And so if you want Black folks to show up, right? Because again, we're gonna do that because we have to fight for our own survival. But Black folks in this moment are looking for, where is the solidarity? The true solidarity. And we can't get to solidarity unless we address anti-Blackness at the core. At the core, things have been, Black people have been seen as the disposable, right? And because we're at the bottom of the totem pole, folks are always wanting to distance themselves from us, to be like, you know what? I don't want to be that. I don't want to be treated like that. So I'll do everything I can to show the folks in power that I'm more aligned with them. When really, you need to fight with the fighters. Really, you need to align yourselves with the warriors, right? And so I think, again, that's where a lot of the fatigue is coming from amongst Black people, is that we've been shown time and time and time again that we can be disposed of. And so when it comes to just talking about fugitive pedagogy, again, I think we're going to need courage. We need people who are going to be willing to do what the ancestors did. Black teachers were willing to say, okay, class, when the administrator or whoever else comes in, I'm going to start talking about this. But while we're in here in this classroom, and when the door closes, we're going to talk about what we need to do. It's always been subversive. And we have to keep with that pedagogy. Right now in Illinois, we have a bunch of mandates that require that we teach women's history, the history of folks with disabilities, the history of LGBTQ folks, Black history, Indigenous history, genocide history. We have mandates and laws already, but how many educators are doing that work? when we have laws right now. What's been passed down from the Department of Ed aren't even laws. These are executive orders. So they don't even have the force of law. So if we weren't doing it before, when we had laws that actually protect and actually mandate that we do this curriculum, it's very unlikely that we're going to do it now. So we're going to have to do some real work with building up courage and the desire and the political will to actually do this work. And you'll have folks who are willing to do it with you. I'll be there. But we have to have folks who are willing to do the work.
And also, I would say, you know, part of being a sustainable community schools and working within 2 schools, I would say the very first thing is just the willingness to accept your own biases. The teachers and the counselors, that has been our biggest fight. The biggest obstacles are the adults in the building. I always say, let me work with the children because these adults are getting on my nerves because they come with so much prejudice of who our children are. And what they need. And a lot of the times is the educators. And like I said, I'm not a Black woman. I'm in solidarity with the Black community. What does that mean? What's my role being a solidarity and an ally? And pushing constantly, but then we're attacked, right? There they come, trying to bring in this radical, and this was even before Trump, right? Trying to bring in this radical narrative to the school. And the people that we're supposed to work with, our allies, are the ones screaming the loudest because there's this hierarchy, right? So we also have to understand that it's really messy. To be able to do this work is messy because sometimes you have to fight your own. Because there's also, besides race, there's class. There's a lot of, I've heard from their mouths, and the 26th Street in me sometimes wants to, show them something and shut their mouth. But the way they speak about our children, and I'm looking at them, like, aren't they a reflection of your teachings? Aren't they a reflection of us? Like I was always told as an educator, you bring out what's already in them. We don't have to feel anything because every child that is brought to us is full and capable. So when trying to do this, I said for educators and teachers, step aside of yourself sometimes and see that ourselves, we could be the problem and the obstacle when trying to introduce new curriculum or something different. Because for us, it's been fighting teachers. When we try to bring in the Black Panther, when we try to talk about genocide, and we try to talk about South Africa bringing Israel to the court. Oh my God, we got in so much trouble for doing that. We've got, people been accused of a lot of things. And so understanding that sometimes, this is what we need to do and has to be doing, and we're going to continue fighting, but we have to start within and with the educators around us to see, like, how willing are you really to do this? Because there's a lot of pushback, and especially with a lot of working on the west side of Chicago and West Humboldt Park, a lot of our students are survivors of sexual assault, gun violence, the trauma they encounter just walking to school. And then the way they're treated by some of these teachers and counselors. Oh, Lord, the mama in me wants to go slap and be like, did anybody teach you how to treat children? Because they've already had to cross so much bullshit down Chicago Avenue, Pulaski, Monticello. They've already seen addicts, been probably, offered crack, naked ladies, whatever, on their way to school, probably have experienced and seen so much just to be encountered in a school where you're just like, oh, here comes so-and-so. Instead of like being excited and welcoming that there's a new child. I mean, there's a child coming in your presence and making them feel welcome and loved and safe. And I think so for me, I mean, there's something I can see makes my blood boil because I've seen how our children are constantly, like they come with so much pain and we give them more pain in the classrooms instead of creating a safe haven for them. Sometimes we are the ones causing a lot of the harm, and we have to recognize that. And, I know it's hard, but as somebody that has worked within the school as a partner, not as an educator, most of our work is trauma responsive work. And we started working with the students that kept on getting in trouble. And the reasons when we started even trying to say it's more than just restorative practices, we need to understand the root causes of why our children are constantly getting in trouble, right? That's when we started taking more of a trauma responsive, because it's one thing to be informed, but it's another thing to take response, right? So we started learning about that and digging deeper with our children. The stuff we found out, is amazing, right? Our children should be put up here for all that they're able to endure, still come to school and excel instead of being analyzed and why not. Let's look at how they've been able to, despite of your damn policies and practices. That's all I say.
Right. Thank you. We got time for 2 more comments.
I would like to respond next. So in looking at the population that we're speaking to, we have to remember, we're asking a population to teach children outside of your demographics, outside of your population, because like close to 90 or more % of academic staff are white women, white male. So like I said, we all know the answers. We all know the activities. We know the process. But like in that population, what % out of that population can honestly say, like, step forth and say, like, I'm willing to teach. I'm willing to treat students who are different than myself and my family to basically become competitors for jobs, for positions, for economic, wealth, and all of those things. So, in looking at like fugitive pedagogy, you have, historically within our community, you have like, from what I understand, 3 different responses. You have the Maroons, those that left and went out to do their own, right? You have the agents, who I see we as those who work within the system to protect those that need protecting and push forward within the system. And then you have those who are assimilated, or assimilators. And in looking at like the research of Dr. Bobby Wright, Dr. Barunti, and dealing with the idea of racist behavior as being something that's psychopathic, we I think Carl is right. We're putting our children in situations that is more dangerous than them walking through Chicago and Pulaski. Like, honestly, like we have to really take an honest look. The questions that we're asking, we don't have the answers for. I mean, we do, but we're not in a position to deliver those answers, as Dr. Monique was saying. It's going to take time to bring our population into this system, so that our children can truly be protected. If the current population and academics aren't able to respond to our children the way that we need to, and I think that's the hard question. And dealing with fugitive pedagogy, I work with the independent institutions of no, I'm sorry, the independent international institutions for Black institutions. I missaid it, but it's CIB. I'm pronouncing it wrong, but they've been around since '72 out of South Carolina, and the Marcus Garvey schools and the Freedom schools and everything else. Those populations, they're not going to wait for the answer from that demographic. I don't like to respond to the answer and then try to convince someone else that now you got to do my answer, because I don't. In dealing with relationships, I'm only going to control myself. We are only going to control ourselves, and so I think that should be like the focus in honoring the idea of fugitive pedagogy.
All right. So I'm going to ask, I know we're at 6:21, but I want to see if Dr. Elvira or Anaka want to have something. So I'm going to ask, are the panelists okay if we go to 6:45? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So Dr. Elvira and Anaka, if y'all want to say anything about this, and then we will open it up for questions, comments, and audience participation, and we will conclude with concrete actions that folks can take. Go ahead.
I did. I wanted to add to what Cato and Dr. Johnson were saying. I feel like, you know, when Dr. Johnson mentioned this fugitive, I mean the Maroons, you know, that is still existing in the community. That's still that space is still happening. That work is still getting done, you know. And I don't think, kind of to Cato's point, that you can really have any momentum happen in the classroom without some type of collaboration with these fugitive spaces that operate outside of the classroom coming in there. And to Cato's point, I remember some years ago when I was with the Chicago Grassroots Curriculum Task Force, we got a letter from this teacher that wrote us this letter saying, I'll pay you out of my pocket if you could help me come to school each day and not dread my life and dread looking at these kids and blah, 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 blah. I will pay you out of my pocket. We were blown away. It is at Gage Park High School. So we go up there and we go talk to this, you know, to go see, because we're, you know, as you know, members of the community. This is like a kind of, at the time, you know, an outside space coming into the classroom to kind of help aid teachers from outside the classroom, which is that dynamic I'm saying we have to keep alive. So we go into the guy's classroom. He's a white teacher. He's at Gage Park High School. And at the time, the kids had a lot going on with the particular principal that they had going on that was there at that time. And the classroom is completely disheveled. The blinds are all over the place. There's not one poster on the wall. The desks are all disheveled. There's trash all over the place. So we're just observing the classroom. The kids are getting up in groups, going to the bathroom. They're laughing. They're doing all this different stuff. And, so we're just observing, and we go take them for lunch later, you know, after our observation to see, you know, what's going on. How does he feel about, you know, and he's just completely disengaged. And I asked him, I said, what are your thoughts about these particular students? He's like, I mean, I don't know. I don't like, you know, and basically what came out is he had no faith or belief. He said, I didn't come from this type of reality, so I don't know. So how are you in this classroom teaching these kids and you have zero faith in them, right? You have zero faith, and it's not about these respectability politics where you're in there and it's authoritarian, do what I said, and this and that. When you're coming from a place of love, of actually loving education and loving these children, and that they pick up on that, they will respect you. I've seen it happen over and over again. They will respect you. You don't have to do. I still stay in communication with my 7th and 8th grade teacher. You know, she means the world to me. You know, and she ran that class, and we had a wild classroom, and she ran it with love and care and intentionality. And when we ended up going in, we helped this guy get his classroom together for the love of the students, you know, and had him do a project to help decorate the class together and, you know, decorate, you know, do some projects together, get the kids involved. We talked to the kids, say how they felt, and the kids came straight out. We think he's a punk, bitch, you know, they coming straight out with it. But this is, you know, they're picking up, they're not stupid. But this is the dynamic, you know, so they're not engaged. They're in this classroom, in this man's classroom, engaging at all. You know, we were able to come in, and this is an outside space coming in because I think when it comes to Black children, Black and brown children, they're inside a space that was never designed for their success to begin with. And we all know this on the outside. And we have to strategize, and those teachers that are in the classroom, they need to go find those blocks and those Catos, you know what I mean? The other people, Anankas in the community doing stuff individually, and you know, and some of these mamas and babas and fathers and uncles and grandmamas in the community, and really help them get more invested. I feel like that kind of stuff has always existed. That's how we've made it far. And I know from the view of education in the Black community, we've always had to be number one. You know what I mean? Because they didn't want it. We weren't supposed to read it. We had Black people reading in some cases when white folks weren't even reading. You know what I mean? We've had this thing where it was the slogan for Black Star where I'm at is educate or die. And Phil Jackson, the late Phil Jackson, who founded that, you know, he had this understanding of these fugitive spaces for education that, you know, the stakes are high. You know, and if our children can't understand what's happening and they don't know how to maneuver and read the signs in society, and and know how to grasp information from their environments and also from other educational sources, it's not looking good, you know. But I just wanted to reiterate and bring up the story because it's into what both Dr. Johnson and Cotto saying. Thank you.
No, thank you, because that helps us ground something in something contextual and something real that we can hold on to, you know. And I just want to thank everybody, but I wanted to make sure, Dr. Elvira, did you want to say something on this last point? And then we will go open it up to the audience.
I'm going to say 3 things. And one of them is that we ask Black and Brown children, we police them constantly. We ask them to be uncomfortable in our educational spaces. Yet we as educators don't ask ourselves the same questions. We don't ask ourselves, why is it that we're so focused on behaviors? We don't ask ourselves, what are the biases that I'm bringing into the classroom? We don't ask ourselves necessarily, what is it that I know about the community that I'm servicing? Because we're providing a service to community. So I always feel, when we think about asking people to be outside we're asking our students to be outside their comfort zones, then we as educators should ask the same of ourselves. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is one of the strategies that I've leaned into throughout what's been happening these last couple of months is this kind of concept of freedom dreaming, of having this something that we find in our communities already. It's imagining something different and kind of focusing on this kind of radical love and radical imagination, because we need to put the human back into education. We work with people, and we need to have a humanizing pedagogy, humanizing education, where we're not asking students to survive. We're not teaching them how to act in front of the police. We're teaching them how to thrive, how to create a world that is made for them. And in order for us to be able to do this, we have to encourage ourselves to think about, why is it that I'm an educator? Do I have the courage to speak to the things that are impacting me, my child's life, my community's life, that's impacting everybody? Because as educators, we work for the collective good. And we kind of constantly have to go and think about, are we really doing that? Or are we creating more harm? Because when I am an educator, I come from a place of radical love. I may not love what you're doing right now, but I love you and I believe in you, and everything in my space will show you that. So I think that we have to, and it might sound cliche, but sometimes the kids there were students that I was like, I don't know why this child is here again, because I was an 8th grade teacher. And I would see them coming up the stairs, but and I would have to breathe, but I would say, they need love. And this student was here every day. And once you find out the histories of persistence and resilience that our students bring every day to the table, I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the fact that this is not our students have so much to give that we have to kind of create and hold space for our students to tell these stories, and for us to be able to listen, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of being in solidarity with the communities and the students that we teach, because we want them to continue to build critical awareness. We want them to continue to tell us our stories of resistance, because they're embedded within our own stories and within our own histories. And we want to definitely encourage them to continue to notice, name, and fight against the discrimination that's happening within all of our communities. And that's it.
Okay, I'm loving that. Every time any of y'all speak, y'all dropping the mic like boom, boom, boom. Yes, y'all is, talk about speaking truth to power. So, okay, audience, I know if you've been itching to ask a question or to have a comment, now is your time. We have I'm going to open a little 10-minute window real fast. So anybody just unmute and go for it. Or if you are shy, you can put your question in the chat and I can read it.
I have a burning question, if I can ask. So thank you all so much. It's so nice to see some familiar faces. And I just want to say that, I think the community wisdom piece that you all were talking about earlier is so important. And I think about how I've taken these like golden nuggets of insights that Caro has shared, that Ananka has shared. And to this day, I will like quote you all. Caro, the one thing that I always talk about and I attribute to you is how you talk about not buy-in, but ownership. right? And how there's a difference. Like, we're not car salesmen. We're not trying to get people to like buy in, but we really need people to take ownership, right, of the students that we serve. And Ananka, the phrase that I have taken away from you and I still will share with people to this day is keeping the main thing, right? Because it's so easy to kind of get lost and go in all of these different directions, but I really appreciate that phrase from you. And so the question that I have is actually one that Dr. Rudeau-Smith started talking about earlier, and I'm thinking about it particularly because I have a graduate student who's working on a research project on this topic in particular. And so we talk a lot about the anti-Blackness and the implications on students, but she's really wanting to look at, teachers and the retention of Black teachers, and then the kinds of experiences that they have as teachers that then determine whether they choose to go into leadership positions and become, principals and so on. And there are also lots of benefits of having Black principals. And so, I just wanted to start with Dr. Rudeau-Smith, but for all of the panelists also, if you all could say more about how anti-Blackness manifests in relation to Black teachers and also leadership in schools. And I want to make a final point here and say that, since our dean is on, I also think we could do a much better job in teacher education, preparing teachers to go into these spaces. I don't think it's enough to teach them about, Black history or Latinx history. I really think that we need to have some intentional conversations on whiteness and their own whiteness and how that plays out in the classroom. So, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Rudeau-Smith, if you want to start.
Sure. I mean, I'll just piggyback on what you just left off with. Like one of my things in that I think colleges of ed, I think administrators should also ask is when, folks are coming to you to be hired, to ask them, why do you want to work here? Why do you want to work with this particular population? Right? Folks who are already teaching, to really think about, why are you actually there? Have you just been teaching there for years and the demographics have changed and gentrification has happened, and so you're still there but the population is different? Is that the only place you could get a job? Do you believe all children are the same? Do you believe in Black liberation? Like, your why is really important, especially in this moment. Because as we just talked about, like, fugitive pedagogy was rooted in radical love and in hope. The belief that education could help transform folks' reality. It could transform society, right? And so if you don't believe society needs to be transformed, or if you don't believe or really have true love for this particular population, then you probably are doing a disservice by being in that space. Right. And so I think folks got to be real clear and real thoughtful in this moment about why are you doing what you are doing, particularly when it comes to education. To get to your other point, because I do statewide work, the anti-Blackness is absolutely real, right? Because when I talk about that there's only sometimes 1 or 2 Black teachers in spaces where there is an overwhelming Black and brown majority, what happens is those teachers, because they are coming there with a radical love and a hope for young people, they become, obviously, a lot of times, the informal mentors, right? Formally and informally. But that also leads to burnout when you are the one that, you are the youth whisperer. And so every time someone has an issue with a particular young person, they're coming to you. And you take that on because you love young people, because you want to see them do well and to not be harmed. But it becomes overwhelming when other folks are not doing their jobs. And that becomes, again, a burden that is only left to you, that you become the only cultural competent adult, trustworthy adult in that building or in that space. And so sometimes people literally have to leave because of that, because the burnout is real, right? And then they feel the guilt of leaving young people then in that space and saying now they have no one. And so there's a grappling with that. So the anti-Blackness is absolutely real in spaces for Black teachers as well, because they're constantly seeing the harm that's being done, not only to young people, but that's also being done to them in those spaces, and trying to navigate both of those, and also trying to be a buffer. Again, after 2020, almost every school, every organization got an equity committee, right? And a lot of times those equity committees were committees that were the folks who do the brunt of the work, again, having to volunteer to take on all of the equity issues within the school space with no compensation, right? And no, not even a title, right? Or even if sometimes a title, no real power, because they didn't come with a budget, right? It didn't come with anything that was there to make real change, but yet that was, again, more of their professional capacity that was used. So it's this constant draining of the Black educators that we do have. And I always tell folks that there was all of this work being put into recruitment. Like, we need to get more Black teachers. We need to get more Black teachers. Well, your best recruiters are the folks that you already have. What are they telling their children and their nieces and nephews and godchildren about coming into an education profession? Most of the educators that I know are steering their loved ones away from education because of the burnout and because of the policies and because of just how awful it is trying to do this work in this moment. And so we have to think about recruitment and also retention. So what are we doing in our spaces to retain Black educators, particularly brown educators? How are we creating affinity spaces and groups? How are we creating spaces where folks feel supported in order to do the work and not burnt out? And so I think we are also dropping the ball, absolutely, for our young people, but also for our veteran educators. We're having a fight right now in Chicago public schools. There is an evaluation system that is absolutely biased and racist against Black teachers. So you're saying come in on the one hand and then pushing them out the door with the other, and saying we're going to punish you for being a Black teacher and for teaching Black children. So this entire system has to be just gutted out and burned down from the roots, because it is anti-Black and it is carceral at its core. And the last thing I'll say about that is, part of the reason for that is because if we really think about it, public education is the product of the Black liberation imagination, the Black liberatory imagination. Black people, newly emancipated Black people, said, the state, you have a responsibility to provide an education for our children after all of the work and labor and blood that we have poured into this country, right? And so public education actually came from the demands of newly emancipated Black folks. And that is why they seek to destroy it, but that is also why it will never, ever be destroyed.
All right, does anybody else want to respond to that? All right. All right, so we had a question in the chat. Cassandra, do you want me to read your question, or do you want to unmic and read it yourself? All right, it says, what are your thoughts on segregation possibly coming back to the US under the Trump administration? How will this impact education in this country? So let me just say, we are already segregated, and it never really left. It just became de facto segregation. Okay, so that's my little history lesson. Go ahead, panelists.
Ultimately, I think it's up to the people. I think it's up to the population. I mean, like you said, Dr. Will, is de facto. The idea of, you have the amendments, 13th, 14th amendments, and you have Brown versus the Board of Education. But we also have to remember, like, military desegregated before the education did. And so it's, for me, I'm looking at, like, cultural logic of people. I'm not trying to project the way I understand things to people like Trump and his followers. But the idea that legislation can end something, it ultimately comes down to the population, to the people. How do the people of this country want to live? And I think ultimately that is it. I mean, in the course, like with public jobs and organizations that get public funding, you know, we have to have these things that, you know, organizations do not discriminate. But, you know, but then again, what about the private sector? And you have this separation in this country. You have constitutional law that's directly directed by constitutional law. You also have tort law, and organizations that are affected by that. As long as that these organizations aren't going against constitutional law, you know, we have to prove it as individuals, but it's embedded into our national laws. Like you said, Dr. Wheeler, again, is you know, de facto, but I think ultimately it is up to the population of this country. And I think as a multicultural country, we could do great things, but we have a small sector of people for whatever their reasons, and some are figuring out that they voted for the wrong reasons now. But you have some who just do not want to lose their idea of power, their idea of existence, and that's highly unfortunate because I don't see any other way other than a natural way when you're talking about numbers and population and multiculturalism.
Great. So we're going to conclude with our last question. What are concrete actions that educators, students, parents, and community advocates can take to push back against this anti-Blackness in education at the local, state, and national level? Who would like to start us out? And I'm going to
I just got to say something real simple.
Go ahead.
I said, know your power. I think we have been talking about this. We don't know our power. A lot of the things, even like when we changed laws and policies, when we had changed the student code of conduct, still a lot of the students didn't know that there was things that how to advocate for it. So the policy piece is important. However, if people don't know how to use it and advocate for themselves and how to implement their power, that's when we get, you know, screwed over, to put it in simplest terms. So I think it's really understanding what is our power as a parent, as a student, and being able to advocate for yourself. And for us as community partners, that's our job, is to ensure that our students and our parents have the tools to be able to advocate for themselves and their students.
You.
Sorry, I was gonna add on to what Caro just said. Basically, know your power, find your people, protect your people. Like, make sure that you do no harm. Make sure that that there's harm reduction for groups that are targeted, particularly right now. Disrupt and disobey. Like, I always lean on the nonviolence of Dr. Martin Luther King, and kind of some of the, if it is immoral, then we should not be participating in it. So kind of protesting and supporting nonviolent disobedience as a way to fight back. Thinking and imagining and building alternatives within your community. So in order to find and hold some space. And I think particularly now when we're seeing the defunding of XYZ, we really want to think about the roles that civic and democratic institutions play, and think about how important it is. Why is it that we're making it harder for people to vote, for example, or to have access to voting? On that note, I will say that as a parent, I pay a lot of attention to school board elections, and because they choose curriculum. And as an educator, they choose the curriculum and the books that you use when you teach. So I literally go on their Facebook pages, on their social media accounts, and I investigate them, because that is the power. That is a power that I have. And that is a power that I've noticed that other parents at my son's school also utilize. And we tell each other, this is what was happening. The other thing is library boards. They're at the forefront of First Amendment rights. So just keep your eye. And a lot of people that are now very active in the quote unquote parental right movement have started on library boards. So just kind of paying attention to local kind of issues that impact education directly, particularly when we think about censorship and book banning. I know that libraries may not be the first place that we think about, but they are literally holding the line when it comes to issues of censorship and book bannings and what we teach. So
Thanks. Just keep going through, folks. Who wants to go next?
I'll say something briefly, piggybacking on what Kato, and is it Elvira? Yes, okay, I know you. I just couldn't, anyway. Just another thing is like holding people accountable. Like these seats, we may not like who's in a particular position, but there's certain roles and responsibilities to these seats that people are running for, whether it's at the alderman level, and we need to hold these people accountable to what their job is, regardless if we like them and we're in some kind of we don't like their hairstyle, we don't like how they do this and that. There's certain roles and responsibilities that come along with these seats that they get elected into, and we need to hold them accountable. Another thing, just briefly, is coalition building. That's been something that has been powerful throughout the years. And I think it's still something. I'm on some coalitions now, and the power is in the people, especially those of us who are, on the outskirts of society that don't have the financial means. Our power is going to be in our numbers and in us being able to build these relationships in our community. And lastly, don't feed into these fear tactics. Right now, they're going to try to drain us by just inundating us with fear. And for us, I feel like we're coming full circle. Our ancestors have been through all of this stuff. They have laid down the law. They have laid down the foundation. They have given us the blueprint. We know exactly what we need to do. And now we have way more highly educated PhDs. Even the people on the street level are way more informed and know how to maneuver. We got the internet. We know what we got to do. And there's no reason for us to be afraid and to give in to the anxiety. So take good care of your health. Take care of your well-being, take care of the people that are close to you. Family is important, and they're trying to leach that out of our society. And yeah, just leave it there. Thank you all so much. It's been incredible being on this panel with such, intentional thinkers and doers.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? I think we got Dr. Monique or Dr. Tracy.
I must speak to just knowing your power. I think I want to talk to our white comrades who are out there. We don't need allies no more. We need comrades. We need folks who understand that your struggle is my struggle, and that you can't be free unless we all free. Right? As long as there's a population of folks who can be disposed of, as long as they only coming for the trans folks, or they only coming for the Black folks, or they only coming for, they will continue to be able to divide us. So we need, in this moment, comrades, right? We don't need no more bracelets or hats or all of those, or the buttons and whatever else. We need folks who are going to stand down and who are going to get on the front lines, because at the end of the day, we know who are the targets. You can show your power, you have power and privilege, right? Use it. Use your power and privilege for liberation. Because again, none of us is going to be free until all of us are free.
I'll just end by saying thank you to the other panelists, and it's up to the population, and multiculturalism is a beautiful thing. So many advantages. Like we all said, we value each other, we listen to each other, we work together, we hold to the truths of what this country, democracy, should be, is becoming. And we ain't scared, and amen.
All right. So I just want to thank my wonderful panelists. If we could just thank them. I want to thank my EDFN faculty who were able to check in and join. I want to thank Dr. President Bell Jordan, who was able to pop on, and Dean Filion for doing our introduction, and again, Miss Marlena Crew. And I want to thank you all, students, educators, all of y'all who showed up and said that something like this is important. So, because that means something. And I also hope that we take the wisdom and the courage and the commitment that we saw from these panelists today. And if you don't know, ask somebody, take a class, reach out. Don't go out there doing some half-butt stuff, okay? And
come to the hood.
and don't be afraid. because that is where their power lies. So I want to thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald, for saying that. Do not be afraid, because we have been here before and it has been worse. My mom is 89 years old, and she said to me, she said, baby girl, it's getting worse before it get better, but y'all got a foundation. Y'all got a blueprint, because the people that came before you, just like Ananka said, showed us the way. Just like Dr. Rudolph Smith said, showed us the way. So I just want y'all to know that each one, teach one, reach one, lift one. Okay? So that's what we have to do. And we cannot be afraid. And just like I tell my students, we can't get everybody. We can't be there for everybody, but just like the little boy picking up the starfish, putting it back in the water, we help that one. We help that one, and we keep going along. And just like a pond, that one ripple goes out. And my son, the political science major, I want to honor him tonight, because I was like, what we gonna do, dude? How we gonna do this? And he said, Mommy, local community, old school, what your generation did in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s and the 40s, when Black folks started civil and human rights, okay? With A. Philip Randolph and the Porters, okay? But I'm not gonna go into my little history stuff. Thank y'all so much for staying. Thank y'all, wonderful people. If my panelists could just stay on for a few minutes, I wanna make sure that I get your honorarium stuff. Thank y'all so much. We are ending the recording now. Be blessed and highly favored. Be blessed and be a blessing to somebody else. Thank y'all.
Thank you.